Welcome to Rauta and the fourth episode of original Finnish black metal from the 90s. Now in my previous episodes I went through some originators of the scene including Buried, Imbil Nazarene, Archgoat. Later on ventured a little bit more successful bands and other important bands from the past. However, without these three bands in this time, the so-called Finnish sound probably wouldn't exactly be what it really is, maybe excluding Satanic Warmaster, which I talked through in the previous episode. So in this episode, we'll talk about the music of Horna, Behexen and Sargeist, more or less in that order too. Now, two of these bands are getting, or already gotten their separate episodes through their history and discography, so let's not focus on each individual band so much, but give you an overall recap what's going on. If you want to find more information about that, well, I would suggest you to give a go with these given retrospective videos as well as the interviews linked to them. But let's go and start from Horna. I'm gonna go through these in the in order how they are or were founded back in the days. Obviously, dates may differ a little bit, but this is roughly how we go. So, 1993, there was a band known Shadowed. Probably most people don't even know the band or remember the name because Horna has been stuck in history for more than three decades. That's a lot of time, and Horna has proven to be one of the most hardworking, probably the most hardworking band in the Finnish black metal scene. Why so? It's a good question, really, because how it operates is around Shadraug, the main founder or the main member of the band and also founder of the band, and he has been the only member in the band during the years who hasn't really changed. I mean, if you take a look at this lineup, it's relatively new for some parts, like two later members have been in the band less than 10 years. Then Spelgoth, the vocalist of the third era, 15 years, which is half the year of the hard career so far. And Infection, originally bass player and all that stuff, but later on focusing on guitars and all that stuff for more than 20 years. So 2/3, give or take. But Shadraug is the only one who has been here since the beginning. But obviously past members are worth taking a quick look, even though I will go more in detail in the retrospective video. So mostly I think it's worth mentioning that obviously Nazgul, nowadays known for his work and Satanic Warmaster or Werewolf, the name, he was there the first early years and as such created with Shadraug and the other guys the so-called first era or first phase of Horna. Later on there was this vocalist Corvus, which is nowadays mostly known for his work for Gorgondrus, among other bands, and he was another 7 years in the band. And both of these vocalists are a little bit different. And I would say Horna mostly goes with the vocalists because all these vocalists have a little bit different sound and style, so it's easy to see them as different phases because Shadraug's music, given that he is the composer of the band, hasn't really changed that much. There are a little bit changes here and there, but that's how it goes. For drummers, bass, and all that stuff, as you can see, there has been quite a few people along the years. You have had a few bass players, you have had a few guitarists and drummers. But like I said, it has mostly been operating with Shadraug and Infection more than big chunk of the whole career. So whatever started in early 90s took the classic take. A couple of demos first, and then you move on doing albums. And the early years were quite, hasty with the first couple of albums gotten out back to back. Then started the era which I guess can be seen in so many ways a golden era. Well, this depends on the given people, but there starts to be this very, very active phase. Horna wasn't touring or doing gigs as much, obviously, back in the days as nowadays. Things have changed in so many ways throughout the decades, but EPs and splits came basically back to back, with full length in the middle, and then more EP splits and all that stuff. And this era started quite early on, basically 1999, as you can see here, probably. And then eventually lasted for a great chunk of years until around 2011 or so. It started to change, and then there were more full albums rather than EPs and splits. Well, maybe 50-50, but you get the idea. So this era where there were lots of splits and all kind of collaborations was the most fruitful era in terms of amount of releases. Now, whether you go for quality or quantity, it's obviously a different question. In my opinion, in general, Horna has excelled better with full albums, in my opinion. But, things may differ, mileage may vary, and all that stuff. And obviously, there are some splits and EPs which really have some of the better material by Horna. Now, overall, the style has always kind of been the second wave Nordic style, meaning there are lots of reminiscence about the Norwegian scene. Some people were already, kind of accusing that, Shatrok was very much, if not outright stealing or copying, just very much, let's say, being inspired by Norwegian black metal bands. And you can go for various amounts of different bands, maybe early Dirtheimskard. I think that was mentioned early on about Horna. But you can really hear a lot of different bands, maybe not just pinpoint one name, but a bunch of names. All in all, I mean, if you compare all the scenes in the world in general, how Horna has been sounding like and how it has been, kind of putting their music through in different scenes. I mean, most obvious culprits come from Norway and Sweden. It's never like Horna had a chaotic or war metal presence of the Canadian or South American style, or for that matter, the more warm-hearted and atmospheric style of the Greek scene, which was very, very important already in the early 90s. So, whatever your take is on various different releases and all that stuff, Horna has mostly been about, the Nordic sound, and as such helped paving the way for a lot of, Finnish bands for that matter. I mean, if you compare Horna's music to, say, the early birds, like Baratrum, Imbel Nazarene, Berit, or Archgoat, I mean, Horna is clearly different. Then again, all of these four names, which I would consider personally like the cornerstones of Finnish black metal. Let's not forget Baratrum, by the way. So maybe there are 5 corners, like 5-pointed star in a way. Because all of these bands were very early on there. Now, Horna came a little bit later, but it's a matter of a year or two, so it doesn't really matter. What matters is that Horna kind of took the so-called Finnish sound later on to someplace different. Sure, early on it was raw and maybe closer to bands, say, than early Gorgoroth and Darkthrone and the like, rather than the more symphonic bands, say, as Emperor or Dimmu Borgir. I mean, there is not that. Or about the faster bands, like you don't really find that immortal thing so much with Horna's music. But Horna has been always doing their own style, and obviously over the years it kind of focused more on the given style. Somewhat melodic, but still kind of grim and raw. Not ultra raw. We're not talking about the Iliarns and the likes here. Not even the darkroom rawness, but still very far from the more polished melodic style, which was very, very prevalent already in the 90s. So while Finnish black metal might seem a little bit of a late bloomer versus Norwegian style. I mean, after all, a lot of Norwegian classics came out in, say, between 1992, 1995, or even 1991. And Horna started barely in 1993, or with 1994, under the name of Horna. So you might say it's a little bit late bloomer, but then again, the same applies to bands, say, as Dimmu Borgir, 1995 and onwards. So while Norwegian maybe had a little bit of head start with some Swedish names in the early 90s, Horna was quickly, coming and conquering their own ways and like saying, hey, here we are in Finland. Even if basically Archgoat first year lasted only for a second and Berit not too much before going to ambience, it was pretty much up to bands like Imbel, Nazarene, Baratrum and Horna to keep the black flame burning already in the early 90s, not early but mid and late 90s and then 2000s and onwards. And that's where the momentum shift started to happen because, Norwegian was basically losing their key bands. Bands were changing their style or quitting altogether. And suddenly, by 2000s, Finnish black metal was blooming, Norwegian was dying, Sweden was hanging on along the middle. Obviously, some bigger bands managed to do later on, but goes beyond the scope of this video. My point here is, Horna with around more than 50 releases, including all the split compilations and what have you, is definitely one of the most active Nordic acts, not Norwegian act, Nordic acts, not to mention Finnish acts in terms of the amount of music they have been putting out. And while some of the albums are clearly better, there are some albums or some releases overall which I would consider more like fillers. Overall, the whole thing is quite well balanced in a way. They definitely have found their audience, and despite all these lineup changes, they have managed to pave the way and keep it true all the way down. Now, I've known quite a few Horna members over the years, over the decades, and all I can say is I never found an A-hat in the given band. All the guys have been, true to their own thing. They're no posers. They have been always true to the, black metal flame, if you will. And good musicians, good guys, so can't really bitch about it because it's a good band with good players. But if you ask me, it's more of a live band than a studio band. But more about Horna's discography with more details and more talk about lyrics and things and like that in the given Horna video. Now another band that was already active there in the mid-90s, albeit first with a different name, is Behexen. So they started with Behexen name in 1996, yet they still didn't skip the more important demo phase like unfortunately so many bands these days tend to do. So first couple of demos and then entered the album phase around 2000. Now mind you, 2001 is the very pivotal moment for a lot of Finnish bands. I would say in the Finnish metal scene in general, 2001 is a very, very important year because that's when the album started coming by the storm. There are lots of bands whose debut album is 2001. So Behexen just mildly made it before that with their 2000 album Ritual Satanum, which is more, kind of evil sounding in compared to Horna, and obviously in general more, the faster type. So very, very Nordic sounding once again, and with, Horna and Satanic Warmaster and also the Sargeist. Behexen was there to just kind of define the Finnish style. I mean, obviously it's not that far from the, Nordic style in general, be it Swedish or Norwegian, but there are differences. Like first couple of Behexen albums are more melodic in nature and faster than what happened later on, and they as such kind of can be lumped up as, let's say, melodic, fast, grim black metal. Very satanic and all, whereas Horna was all about singing in Finnish, a little bit, poetic in a way, and all that stuff. Behexen went straight on into occultism, rituals, and obviously Satanism and all that stuff. And obviously the anti-Christianity themes are very, very much along with both bands. Now, Behexen in general is more English than Finnish, but there are both languages used, much like there is in Horna. But Horna has only few lyrics in English, where Behexen is more about English. And that is then again reflected with their album names. Now, whereas Ritual Satanum and By the Blessing of Satan sound like they were recorded back to back. There was 4 years difference. The style is very, very much the same despite the differences. But with My Soul for His Glory, the so-called golden or brown album, if you will, by the cover, this kind of started adding some new ideas to the thing. And in my opinion, it's in a way a little bit more, it has a little bit more unique sound than the first two. It's almost like the so-called third hard album, like the saying among reviewers sometimes go, is where, the bands end up so often in the crossroads, figuring out whether they're going to keep owing exactly the same as two previous albums or change something. Now, while the changes are not that big, Behexen started changing a little bit, maybe less melodic, maybe a little bit more mid-tempo parts, maybe in a way more mature sounding in that way, but still sounding the same. And mind you, there is interestingly 2004 split between Horna and Behexen, where in my opinion Behexen is better. Horna does decent job, but Behexen does better. Now, this trio of albums were then followed quite quickly from the Devil's Chalice EP, which I remember to be good. And later on there was another split with Behexen and Satanic Warmaster, so quite a busy era here. Took another few years and nights at Emanations, which incorporated more mid-tempo parts maybe than ever before, and maybe a little bit more towards death metal. I would say this is the kind of a transition phase album in a way. Don't get started too much. It isn't fundamentally changing, but you have the more growlier take on the vocals, whereas the two first ones are more high-pitchy, screamy style. Pretty much the same school of vocals that Nazgul was doing for Horna back in the days. So very high, screamy vocals were gone, and Behexen has started to kind of becoming more grim in different ways. Now, matters of taste aside, both are totally fine. I personally prefer the little bit more raspy take what Nightside Emanations have. And in my opinion, all of these albums are good. There is so much variety in the song quality and songwriting even versus Horna. Horna has been a little bit hit and miss here and there. Some albums are clearly better, some are worse, and most are in the middle. But, Behexen is more consistent. Maybe the slower pace between release let them more time to figure out what they want. And in general, it's a little bit darker band and more evil sounding than Horna. But roughly, it's easy to see them putting same in the Finnish black metal sound box. And their latest album, The Poisonous Path from 2016, is an interesting one because if Nightside Emanation is kind of giving you the idea of transition is happening, here it is more obvious. Even in some points, it kind of sounds like Archcode because there is this death metallic presence so much more. Partially because of the sound, partially because of some of the riffs used, and partially because the more growl vocals. It's not like pure death metal vocals, obviously. It's still, the kind of a hybrid form in a way. But this album has, in a way, more death metal presence. I wouldn't say it's too far-fetched to call it a death black metal album in that sense. But I mean, obviously I'm not going to argue that people can say it's purely black metal. But then again, you could say that about Archcode as well, and then you have the genre fight going on. Now, rumors and confirmed ones say that there might be some new Behexen material coming out 2025, which would be about due time. I mean, it's been 9 years since the previous album. So now, in hindsight, take a look at this. 25 years and only 5 albums. Never been that active versus Horna, which has been around roughly the same amount of time, but has more than twice the amount of albums. And the same goes for Barathrum as well. I mean, only a few years older, but has like 10 albums. So with that, it's kind of weird that Behexen hasn't been that active with the albums because they don't do that many gigs either compared to Horna and stuff. But people have, different lives and all that stuff. And mind you, it's worth taking a note that this original duo, Horns and Thorog, also have other bands. Well, Horns maybe not so much, but they do. Just some bands are kept anonymous, and I won't mention them here for the sake of that. Hoth has been more active with the Bithos later on, which had already second album out, and of course this lineup got reinforced later on with Rauta from Norway, man of many bands here in 2009, so quite many years by now, and Infection from 2018 after he took the I guess more permanent position in the band and not just being a live member. Also the Horna connection here and Bithos, where these two guys are. So whatever started as duo more or less, or with past members, there have been more people than that, but always kind of evolving around these two, has now been for a long time a 4-member band. Plus then you have the live musician Evisk, who has been in the bass for more than 10 years now. So a little bit different lineup in terms of live as well versus the albums. Overall, obviously, Behexen is one of the best Finnish black metal bands of all times because they never, kind of strayed away from the given style. And in my opinion, they have already done good job despite the production changes, vocal changes, and all that stuff. So for those who are diehard into occultism, Satanism, and kind of a traditional black metal second wave, Behexen is one of the bands to go with if you get to pick only a few from Finnish scene. The last but not least is Sargeist, which was originally known more like Shadraug versus Behexen guys, like a kind of a trio of things. So almost like match made in heaven. Well, hell, in that matter. But things changed, and later on there was, Behexen guys were out of the band, and there were like other people creating the so-called second era of that stuff, where there's a lot of people were key players in the band, and obviously these are more or less the same scene. Vaina, ex-Horna, for example, was there, and then you had, people from Abysmal, Desolate Shrine, and whatever. So quite an all-star lineup was replaced by another all-star lineup. However, drama ensues and not everybody agrees with, touring and all that stuff. So nowadays lineup is a little bit different. Suddenly, last year, Spellcott from Horna also joined Sargeist, and Shatterock is supposed to now take care both vocals and guitar duties. So it's pretty interesting to see how they are live now versus what they used to be. And then you have had in more than 10 years VJS from outside Finnish borders in the band, and now there is this new drummer from a bunch of other bands. So more international lineup now than ever before. It's going to be interesting how this works really, because 2 guys out of 4 are new into the band, even if they're long time companions of Shatterock and what have you. Musically, in my opinion, Sargeist has always been a kind of a hybrid of Horna and Behexen. Some songs clearly sound more like it's coming from Behexen writer's book, and some are clearly like some ideas which really could be on the Horna albums. So while it had been Shatterock's solo project originally, it's somewhat different than Horna, but at the same time it feels like it's a sibling, like a brother to Horna or something. And the main difference seems to be that, whereas Horna is mostly about Finnish and kind of a poetic, about anti-Christianity, a little bit fantasy and all in the making, Sargeist has always been, more or less in English. And the themes are closer to what you might find in, Behexen lyrics. So once again, Satanism, death, depression, misanthropy, nihilism, evil, darkness are listed here. I think they give a kind of a good overall, understanding what the lyrical themes are made of. But really, some of the songs sound like they could have come out of Behexen things. So it's kind of a weird hybrid. It's always like these 2 bands mentioned first, Horna and Behexen, had a marriage, and Sargeist is their kid. And in a way it is, because the DNA is right there, and this is obviously the younger brother or sister of these 2 aforementioned bands. So it's an interesting trio what we have here, because all these bands have, grown relatively big. In terms of numbers, it's really hard to compare to one another, with Last.fm or Spotify numbers or social media presence, because they are very different in terms of how the music is put there, how they're in social media and all that stuff. For example, Horna's, social media was hijacked, I think last year or a year before, and as such, they had to make a new page. So you can't really just check out the numbers and figure out which one is bigger and all that stuff. Now, in general, I guess Horna is the biggest of them all, because having the longest history, more, Scrubbles on Last.fm, and if they hadn't lost their social media, probably the numbers would be a lot higher than a lot of other bands in the Finnish black metal scene. But then again, Behexen has been always more in the shadows, and since Sargeist is by nature more of a side project than a main band, obviously it's different. But this is not a competition about popularity. I'm just keep giving you some pointers to go with in case you're wondering how it is in Finland in terms of success, popularity, cult value, whatever. In my opinion, all these bands are good, and like I said about Horna guys, same applies to Sargeist guys, past and present, as well as Behexen guys that knowing personally more or less everybody here. I guess we're lucky in Finland to have great, decent people, no assholes here with the scene making good music. Because what bothers me sometimes is I know a great guy and he does shitty music. That's like kind of feels bad, because I like certain people a lot, but I know not every friend of mine makes good music. Then again, there are these people who make great music, but some of them are just intolerable. So I guess this is my homage to these bands, to say at least they all have great lines up, or had people who are now not present in the bands anymore, but good people making good music. Just makes me fucking happy, fella, because we're not in a happy world when we're talking about black metal, so you can consider yourself blessed by the devil when you find these guys making the good music, what it is, dark, evil, and interesting lyrics and also all that stuff. Now, mind you, because of the nature of all these different bands and writers, obviously topics might differ a little bit, even though here on Metal Archives they might be summarized by some of the words. So in case you want to go deeper into these bands, I urge you once again to check out their given retrospective videos of Sargeist and Horna, which are then again linked to their interviews as well. So far, Behexen, I have been unable to, do an interview with them. They are not really that kind of a band who wants to put face on the music. So I guess music and lyrics speak for themselves, while the guys want to stay more or less in the shadows. But that being said, all my respect to all these three bands and their given members. Something good to go with now that you have maybe a little bit more information about these three bands from Finland helping to create the so-called Finnish sound. Next episode we will touch some other kind of stuff from the Finnish metal scene. So let's see about that in the next one. And should you have any questions or comments about these trio of bands, just let me know and I'll try to answer you. Off you go, hail Satan!